I had been working on the presentation and was thinking about finding a humorous running experience to share with you as a way to start the talk. But that happened to be the very day of the Boston Marathon, and so it didn't seem appropriate. And I would guess for most of us in this room that we cannot really comprehend what it must have been like to have been in that place at that time, unless somebody here was there at the time. And although I have run the Boston Marathon on 3 occasions, and I know the exact location, I too can only imagine what it must have been like. No doubt there are numerous stories and varied experiences that come out of that tragic event. Certainly stories of those runners who had actually completed the race before the unthinkable happened. And I realized had I been running at that time, or at least when I had run there, I would have already been done with the race. And then there were those that, runners and spectators alike, that of course were in the midst of the bombing and the chaos, as well as the thousands of runners that were stopped along the way and told that they were not able to complete the race. And understandably, the greatest focus was on those that were in the very midst of the bombing, chaos, and the mass confusion. And so how did they make it through? Of course, we know of those that did not survive, and yet other victims received almost immediate help and attention by those around them. They were not alone. They were surrounded by many that reached out to provide the care that they so desperately needed. And as more and more people became aware of the tragedy through the media, those involved were surrounded and supported by the thoughts and prayers of millions. And I believe that we were all very quickly reminded of how precious life is and how our hopes, our dreams, our plans, our goals, and how our very lives can change in an instant. So how do we endure? How do we keep on running? Like those at the Boston Marathon that day, we all have our own varied experiences and stories to tell about the things that we have faced and overcome in this race of life. Some experiences of tragedy, others of triumph. And as Katie mentioned, my story is one of survival. Again, surviving both near-fatal car accident and breast cancer. And through those experiences, I became very aware of how precious life is, how valuable our prayers are for one another, and the importance of expressing our love for others, as we never know when it may be too late. I also discovered the strength that comes from just having someone present, even when no words are spoken. And then there was the power of touch, be it that simple pat on the back, an arm around the shoulder, or a hug. For there is comfort and assurance in that unspoken message of love, care, and concern. So here's my story, running for life. I presently live in Puyallup, Washington, which is approximately 45 minutes south of Seattle. I'm a professional therapist with my own private practice for counseling with women, through which I'm offering hope for the journey, whatever that looks like. I've been married for nearly 28 years, and my husband and I have 2 grown sons, both in their 20s. And now I've been a runner for nearly 38 years, which is probably longer than at least some of you have even been alive. And although I have run many challenging races through those different distances, the hardest race of my life started on the 14th of January, 1980. I was 22 years old then when I began running in the race between life and death. At the time, I was coaching a high school girls basketball team in a small town approximately 22 miles from my home. And as I was driving home from having coached a game one night, I was involved in a serious car accident. I remember having substitute taught during the day earlier and leaving the school at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But the next thing I knew, 3 days had passed, and I found myself in the hospital trying to hang on to my life. When I awakened, I saw my dad from here in Fargo, my twin sister from nearby in Tacoma, and a doctor standing by my side. And I remember being told where I was and what had happened. The doctor had addressed me by name. He said, "Beth, you have been in a serious car accident, and you are now at Madigan Army Medical Center. He went on to say that my pelvis was broken in 4 places. I had 10 broken ribs, a ruptured bladder, ruptured spleen, which had been removed, and a collapsed left lung, for which I was on a respirator, helping me breathe. And the first thought that crossed my mind when I learned all that was, thank God I'm even alive. I later learned that I was experiencing nerve damage in my left arm, that it required 20 pints of blood, which I understand we normally have 6 pints, and that my heart and lungs had actually stopped working at one point. Upon entrance to the hospital, I was given less than a 5% chance to live. And the doctors credited my survival to my physical fitness prior to the accident, which was due to all of the running I had done over the years. And I credit that as well as by the grace of God. And after making it through the first 72 hours, of course the most critical time period, I seemed to experience a good day and then one not so good. And yet, for the most part, I was making slow but steady improvement. And despite the severity of my injuries and the challenge of rehab, in 3 short weeks I walked out of the hospital and I actually began running again in about 3 months. My recovery was as remarkable as my survival was miraculous. You know, I was not alone in that race between life and death. I had many family members and friends that were present along the sidelines, if you will, offering their prayers and expressions of love, support, and encouragement for what was the hardest race of my life. Running throughout those years not only helped develop my physical fitness, it also helped me to develop a competitive spirit, which included discipline, perseverance, endurance, and determination. You runners know what I'm talking about. And that level of fitness and competitive spirit also aided in my survival. And since my running in Boston in 1983, I've had 2 additional opportunities to run there. One was in April of '87, and the other was April of 2000. And both times, in a roundabout way, I also had the added privilege of speaking at a Marathon Day event there as well. In 1996, however, my family and I went to the 100th running of the Boston Marathon. My hope had been that I could run in that as well. However, I was physically unable to do so at the time. And it was disappointing, and yet I discovered the fulfillment of being on the sidelines that year, cheering thousands of others on in such an historic event, giving them high fives and encouraging them along their way. But sometimes we are the ones needing the support and encouragement while in the run, and other times we are the ones to offer that to others. Because we are here to help one another run the race and run it well. The last time I did run at Boston was in April 2000, and shortly after running that year, I began having some trouble with a big toe on my left foot that was eventually diagnosed as a tiny tear in the tendon to the big toe. As a result of the challenge it had become, I actually sought some counseling to help me deal with the situation. And I discovered that seeking help is really a strength, not a weakness. And having some counseling was really great help to me. And it was through that experience that I was inspired to pursue my master's in counseling, so that I too could offer help to other women when they face various life challenges and concerns. Sometimes that happens. You know, the experiences that we go through can be great teachers, and then those lessons can be shared with others. Well, I began my graduate studies in the fall of 2002 through a distance learning program out of Liberty University in Virginia. 3 weeks after I began my studies, I was faced with a huge women's concern because it was then that I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And yet, despite the challenge of facing breast cancer, I continued my pursuit of my master's degree, as it helped to provide a distraction of sorts and a forward focus. Many people were surprised that I was diagnosed with breast cancer because I was considered a picture of health because of being so committed to physical fitness, and yet no one is immune. And here again, it was my fitness as well as my faith that aided in the fight against breast cancer and in my recovery. It was the 12th of December, 2002, when I had the surgery. And at the same time, I had 4 lymph nodes that were removed to determine whether or not there had been the spread of the cancer. And the first lymph node showed 0.5 millimeters of metastasized cancer, and therefore I was not able to be declared node negative. And yet the question remained, is chemotherapy necessary? Because I choose life. Because I wanted to do everything I could to give myself the best possible outcome. And had I chosen not to do chemo and the cancer returned, I would always wonder, well, why didn't I do the chemo? Choosing to do the chemo, although there's never a guarantee that the cancer would not return, I know that if it did come back, that I had done everything I knew to do to give myself, again, that best possible outcome. And despite the initial fear of having the chemo, again, I knew that's what I needed to do. I had 4 rounds of chemotherapy, once every 3 weeks. And those 4 rounds I likened to running on 4 laps on a track. The first round, first lap, was feeling pretty fresh and ready to take on the challenge, and yet not fully knowing what to expect. The second round, second lap, I began to feel some of the effects of the chemo or the challenge of the run. Third round, third lap, was the hardest with the accumulation of the chemotherapy or the buildup of the lactic acid had I been running. And despite feeling worse, the 4th round, 4th lap was easier because I knew it was the last one. I was nearing the finish line, and when the finish line is in sight, somehow it is easier to find the strength to finish well. And speaking of running while having chemo, I did just that. I certainly didn't feel up to it in the first week following my treatment, but in the in-between weeks, I did. I would run, and throughout the challenge, I just had to keep the faith and keep on running. I am now a 10-and-a-half-year breast cancer survivor, and after the first 5 years, I participated in the Seattle Susan G. Komen 3-day 60-mile walk in honor of that. And I did the same last fall after 5 more years of survival. It's a great way to celebrate life. Now, my car accident experience and my fight against breast cancer are just 2 of the challenges that I have faced in this race of life. Again, we all have challenges and obstacles to overcome and stories to tell. And so I thank you again for allowing me this opportunity to share my story with you. And so God bless each of you. Whether you are running tomorrow or not, you are running in this race of life. And may you run it well and finish strong, regardless of what you face. And as for me, I will always keep the faith and keep on running for life.